Right. Mm, This is all right.
Yep.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Oh,
This
carbon finance for clean cooking and reforestation programs. I think I'm have an echo now as well, so you get it twice. And IOM's market-based energy access program in Mozambique. So Norway has been, and I'm pleased to say we will continue to be, a strong supporter of clean energy in humanitarian setting. This is in line with our commitment to climate action, resilience, and self-reliance for refugees and host communities. So this is even written down in our 2024 to 29 humanitarian strategy. It emphasizes energy access as a key enabler for livelihoods, education, healthcare, food security, and climate adaptation. So more concretely, what we would like to happen: fostering viable business model that leverage private investment to deliver energy access to the displaced, in partnership with not the least the displaced people themselves, an inclusive approach, and other actors. And this fits very well with Norway's ambition to reduce funding gaps through more efficient and more innovative models and projects. So, summing up, we need to put our heads together in three key areas: policy, partnership, and finance, to enable the scale in practice. So I'm looking very much forward to hearing today from innovators doing the concrete work to scale energy access through innovative delivery models. And they will today share their successes and challenges for all of us to learn from. And followed by a panel of delivery partners and funders who can provide the fertile ecosystem that we know is needed for scaling up innovations. So now, more than ever, we have to embrace innovative partnerships and deliver models and work together so that we can reach the common goal of supplying better solutions and more long-term solutions to people that need it. So on that final note, thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and a big thank you, I think, to Norway that has been championing this topic for many years at the global level and really at the local level, making sure that funding gets to the ground, to the projects, but then also that global ecosystem is there to build this network of partners. So thank you very much. Yeah, we will now have two sets of panels. One who will be really looking at innovators that are really developing and delivering these type of public-private partnerships and looking at new ways of working. And then we'll have another panel and then followed by a Q&A. But before, could we just get a bit of a sense of who's in the room? So if you're a humanitarian implementer, maybe could you raise your hand? You. So around 10%, nice-ish. An innovation partner? Yeah, great. Any private sector companies? Lovely. And any donors? Lovely. And anyone in the other category? Nice, very good. Okay, so we have a good mix of people. Please come in with questions throughout the session, and we really look forward to a great discussion. So with that, I'll invite Dana and the panelist for the first panel up. And then you can use this one.
My French is rusty. Am I refusing that?
And use this computer to make the...
There's many screens here. I refuse, right? Okay, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Ranveig, for your opening remarks. That really underscored, the importance of the energy sector and humanitarian response. I think building off of Ranveig's comments, going back to the 600 150 million people who are without electricity access. Thinking about it from the perspective of the populations that we serve at Creating Hope in Conflict, which is an innovation funding platform that focuses on conflict settings and protracted refugee crises. Only 10% of refugees worldwide have sufficient access to electricity. And for those living in conflict zones, the situation is even worse, and access to energy sources is even more challenging due to ongoing violence, targeting of critical power infrastructure, and rationing of electrical supply, which results in intermittent, insufficient, or non-existent electrical supply to fuel critical and life-saving infrastructure. So where backup electrical supply is available, such as diesel-powered generators, they are often fueled by harmful fuel sources, adding another layer of devastating not only health but environmental impacts. And this, of course, is all added to the humanitarian architecture's reliance also on non-renewable energy sources and diesel reliance, over-reliance as well, which is further exacerbating the sort of harmful environmental impacts in the sector. And so at Grand Challenges Canada, through our Creating Hope in Conflict portfolio, over the past 5 years, we have been investing in innovative solutions that seek to improve access to energy for communities affected by conflict-induced humanitarian crises. Recognizing that there is a need for more innovative, more climate-smart solutions to solve this very real humanitarian challenge. So we support innovators who work in some of the most difficult contexts around the globe. And today you're going to and successes and challenges to testing and scaling innovations that seek to increase access to renewable energy sources. So from improving streetlight solar electrification in the Democratic Republic of Congo, using an innovative financing tool, to enhancing humanitarian aid delivery with solar electromobility kits, to rapid deployment of vital energy infrastructure in conflict zones, these innovators are really testing and scaling promising solutions to transform the energy sector. So I'm going to welcome Dr. Shelley and John, Jacob Oster, and Washima Mede on stage, if they can join me. And maybe while they're finding their seats, I'll just do some quick introductions to give you a sense of kind of where they're coming from. So Dr. Shelley Ann John is the founder and CEO of Imvelo, and they are testing, they're very much at the start of their humanitarian journey, but they're testing Solaris, which is an innovative transport solution that leverages solar electromobility kits to power and optimize truck sharing capacity for humanitarian response efforts in Yemen. And they're really also supporting humanitarian organizations to deliver on their mission in collaboration. I'm also joined by Washima. Hi, Washima. There you are. Washima Mede, who's the CEO of Prado Power. And they are, at Prado Power, they are bridging Nigeria's electricity access divide by providing power for irrigation, farming, post-harvest storage, and processing for major agricultural projects in the region. You can go back one. Thank you. Their innovation combines modular solar energy systems and machinery to support agriculture in conflict-affected regions with no grid power. We're also joined by Jacob Oster, who's the founder and executive director of Last Mile Climate, which is a nonprofit that focuses on helping grassroots humanitarian and government organizations to tackle climate-related challenges faced by people living at the last mile. So welcome, everyone. And then maybe, since we're joined also by Alukita, I will also introduce him, and he's going to be presenting at the end of the panel. And Alukita is the general director at Africa Green Tech Electrification, and they're testing their innovation called the Solar Tainer, which seeks to address energy access challenges in Mali with a mobile solar container equipped with solar panels, storage systems, and inverters to generate and distribute electricity without reliance on power grids or diesel fuel. So welcome to our speakers. I'm going to start with the first question, and whoever wants to start us off, please feel free. But I mean, particularly, I think since January, we're dealing, I mean, in general, we're dealing with shrinking humanitarian funds. I think since January that, the conditions have certainly drastically changed. And in this sort of this environment now of shrinking humanitarian funds and drastic cuts, public-private partnerships and innovative solutions are all the more important. So I'd love to hear from all of you some of the successes you've achieved with public-private partnerships and or generating additional investment capital for your innovation. And maybe what has been your biggest win? Let's start on a positive. We need some good stories at HMPW this week.
No, thanks a lot. And thank you for inviting me for this role is to enable public-private partnerships for climate action in humanitarian context. And I think what we're seeing right now is, and this is not to sound cynical, but that role of being a systemic intermediary that has no special interest in any particular commercial solution, nor any special interest in any particular humanitarian traditional organization to come in fully funded from third-party sources and being able to bring together from a completely independent stand the different government, private sector companies with concrete solutions, investors, and of course, international humanitarian organizations and local humanitarian organizations is an absolutely key thing. So we're getting a lot of traction with a partnership that we've started called the Solco Partnership for Solar Electric Cooking that looks at essentially leveraging the rapidly decreasing cost of solar PV technologies, which is now the absolute most affordable way to generate energy, combined with advances in electric cooking across different technologies, from induction cooking to standalone home solar systems with DC current cooking to electric pressure cooking, and leveraging the possibility to create very high quality, high integrity carbon credits. And different partners, Mercy Corps in Uganda, Alight in Rwanda, SNV in Kenya, are part of the Solco partnership that kind of operates on a franchise model and are really succeeding with creating the sort of localized public-private partnership ecosystems with the global support of GPA, Last Mile Climate, and UNEP around the Solco partnership. And seeing some really great projects come out of that. So it's a multi-project, multi-stakeholder collaboration ecosystem, but with a high degree of facilitation. I think the humanitarian sector has never really been fit for purpose for public-private partnerships. And now with the current situation, this is more needed than ever before. So we're here to support the humanitarian actors in the space with additional capacity, additional funding even, and also leveraging additional, of course, investment capital from the almost unlimited sources of financing that exist in global capital markets and can be deployed whenever there are inefficiencies. And nowhere are we seeing more inefficiencies than energy and humanitarian settings. I mean, currently, it is the most expensive solutions that are being used. People are cooking with firewood. There's no thing that's more expensive than cooking with firewood. The costs are just out of this world. But of course, most of those costs are externalized. So it's extremely complex to set up the systems in a way where you can internalize all of those externalized costs. So the complexity is real, but when leaning into that through a genuine collaborative approach, project-based, one or two stakeholders approach, it needs genuine multi-stakeholder collaboration.
Thanks, Jacob. Maybe I'll turn the mic over to Shelly-Ann. I mean, I know you're very much at the beginning of your humanitarian journey. Tell us a bit about, what's been your win so far in terms of public-private partnerships? What have you been working on and what's been going well for you in that regard?
Well, I think the most important thing in terms of the win, I think for me on a personal level, is this notion that you don't have to be large to succeed, and to use existing technologies, because when people think of innovation, they typically think of having to create something from scratch. And, so much has already been invested in developing of different technologies. Drive things forward, particularly for the humanitarian sector when we have reduced resources available. So in doing so, I think it's important for us to understand what the gaps are. Humanitarian organizations come to the table looking to the private sector for finance, for funding, et cetera. But there are so many other things that they're lacking. You know, understanding the profile, these organizations on a deeper level, I think is really important. You know, doing some research and understanding what their CSR, you know, objectives are and how you might be able to facilitate those as well, I think is quite key. And also then presenting yourself as a business, that this is not, you know, sort of a handout type of situation, but what are your unique, you know, strengths that will help them to sort of complete their puzzle and be that match. So essentially, it's really about, you know, if we are looking at it from a strategic point of view, it's not about the Goliath that you have to sort of slay, but with, as David would say, you know, what is your unique strategy moving forward? And I think for me, the real gain has been, you know, looking at P3s with multiple private sector actors. It's not one that's going to provide the answer for you, but looking at from the financial perspective, looking at technical expertise, and also pulling in academia as well, because they have relationships with multinational organizations often, and can support that whole process as well. But alignment, I think, is the key thing as well. Understanding the culture that you're working with, what's going on, you know, the values of that organization, so that when you're approaching this, it's really with a long-term and a sustainable, you know, view in mind, and not just what your immediate situation might be. So that's about it.
Wonderful, thank you. And maybe
Yeah, so I think you know, within this context, I think it's very essential that we try to engage you know, different sort of stakeholders, the public sector, the private sector, to see like how the innovation aligns with their own objectives as well.
Yeah.
And to also kind of engage and explain to them how you know, the innovation will be transformative. So for example, for us, we were able to sort of issue our first corporate green bond last year, and it was a $4.1 million. And, you know, we got financing from different partners. So from the local capital markets, from DFIs. So it was basically like different sort of financing, you know, towards those projects. And we, you know, continue to engage. I mean, we have a lot of partners, we engage, and we see how to align, you know, what our projects are with what the mandate of these partners are as well. And, you know, just basically structuring the transaction, you know, building our pipelines to show how impactful our projects will be. And yeah, it's been great.
congratulations. That's some very good news. I feel like every time I see you at HPNW, there's always some good and better news to share. So a couple of years ago, you were here with us, and so I'm really happy and pleased to hear about that.
Can I add one thing on what Shelley-Ann said, which is really key, because you mentioned about working, basically you said don't pick winners.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that has happened a lot in the humanitarian sector over the years, is that you see donors setting up programs where nonprofits are asked to find one private sector partner, develop a proposal, and then implement a project with that partner. And that's just a bad model.
Yeah.
Like, just stop it, please, donors out there. Because you're basically asking nonprofit organizations that don't have the expertise to do this, to go out and identify a private sector company and develop it. And it's not the right approach. What you want to do, and that's not market-based, right? Because then you're basically subsidizing one company, which may or may not be, and often isn't, the right player for the right context, the most cost-effective, most fit for purpose. So what you need to do is focus on developing a level playing field. I mean, cash-based interventions is the best way to do, you know, to entice the private sector is when you give people the ability to be consumers. All I'm saying, so for the Solco partnership, for instance, we're not picking any specific companies. It's an open platform, and there's now 11 different e-cooking companies that are partners to this, and none of them will be going through a procurement round, and there will be no distribution. It's all focused on enabling them to sell their products directly to refugees as consumers.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree with you more because with our project, what we're looking at is building a digital platform. So not only are we working on the electromobility kits for the transportation logistics, but we're also looking at the actual users. So that may be, NGOs, it may be fleets, in terms of private actors within Yemen and then beyond. So we want as much as possible for everyone to be able to use that service. I mean, so it's going to be crazy. I think the kind of business model we'll build, we're still working on that, but I think it's exciting. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Maybe we'll switch gears with another question that I would love to hear your responses on. We're working across, well, you are working across, many of you, all of you, very challenging contexts from Yemen to Nigeria to Mali, plus. And what have been some of the biggest operational or contextual challenges or roadblocks you're facing working across the humanitarian sector in Africa and the Middle East? And Alu, I'm sure you've got some things to share in your experience with Mali.
Okay, thank you. I'm very happy to introduce.
Go just turn on your mic.
Africa Green Tech.
Sorry, the question is just in terms of operational challenges.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Donc, je peux répondre en français comme ça, okay.
French is fine, and Aziz
Pour
can
moi,
help with translation.
les défis opérationnels aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment compte tenu de la situation d'insécurité au niveau du Mali et également la pauvreté de la population rurale, c'est très compliqué pour vraiment une entreprise qui vend de l'électricité, à moins que nous ajoutons des projets comme ceux que nous faisons aujourd'hui, d'arriver à faire de l'autonomisation des femmes, accompagner les petits business avec une assistance pour des matériels efficients.
So the most challenges or operational challenges for us is if I can start with the first one is security in Mali, and the second one is poverty in rural areas, and especially for a company or for enterprise like us implementing this and empowering women in rural areas, security and poverty can be our main operational challenges.
Thank you. Maybe Shelley-Ann or Washima, I'm also thinking about the context that you're working in. Yemen, incredibly challenging. Washima, I know you've been doing a lot of thinking around empowering women entrepreneurs through Prado Power. So I'd love to hear both of you sort of your reactions around the challenges of working in these complex environments, complex settings.
Well, really, because we're doing a lot of planning right now, as you know, sorry, Zaina, it was interesting because literally hours before our risk management plan was due to Grand Challenges Canada, we had everything ready, and I was just about to press the send button, and I got a phone call from someone we had on the ground in Yemen saying, the UK and the US have started bombing the Houthi area. And so everything just became very, very real. So for us, really, it comes down to continually looking at that risk management plan, having daily input, having discussions, sometimes several times a day, because although we're not moving product as yet, this is very, very informative for the platform that we're going to be building. What are some of the factors? Where are we getting our information from? What's going to be our decision model once we put that into effect? And also the kind of GIS that we want to set up. So it's kind of like a great rehearsal right at this point, because we know that things are pretty bad, but this is probably going to be the status quo for Yemen, as it has been for a very, very long time, is that unpredictability. So it just forces us really to become much more, what I say, anti-fragile. We're not looking at resilience, we're looking at becoming anti-fragile. And that's sort of my key term, is that we want to know that with each shock, with each mistake, with each error, with whatever is going on, that we build a system that becomes stronger and ability to thrive, as opposed to resilience, which really speaks to the bouncing back. So it's been very helpful for us from that perspective.
So for us, the mission is to kind of, build communities that are inclusive, where, women and other marginalized groups are part of the local economy. And so it's kind of finding, getting adequate data and, trying out solutions within this context to ensure that, they're part of the group. So what we find is there's a lot of pushback in the communities we operate, where, just the traditional norms that exist would sort of prevent, that from happening. So it's a lot of sensitization. Something else we struggle with is getting proper qualitative data, from the field. So we're kind of trying to figure out some of that. Another is just going through a lot of the regulatory work we need to do, and it makes it longer to implement some of these projects. And so those are some of the major challenges. And then designing solutions that would ensure that level of inclusion. So in most of these communities, for example, like women are not part of the local economy, and you need to kind of provide appliances, maybe freezers, cold storage equipment, electric mills, and then just hope that there's going to be payback on that initial upfront, the equipment that was financed upfront. And so far it's been quite. We've seen a lot of compliance. But then, these are some of the major challenges we see in the space. We also see that, the local banks, local financial institutions are not, willing to provide guarantees to enable some of these transactions happen. So it's also sensitizing them, demonstrating that, this could provide return on their investments, and just demonstrating as well that these can be actually commercial transactions. And
Thanks, Washima. And maybe if we could, I'm realizing we're running out of time, 10 minutes, and I really want to give the floor to Lukita, who is going to walk us through a bit of the innovation that he's been driving forward in Mali. And Alu, maybe if we could condense to about 3 minutes, if we don't mind, just in the interest of time. And I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank Grand Challenge Canada for this opportunity. Africa Green Tech is a company under Malian, and the company parent is German. He developed and produced a mobile solar container called solar tenor. Okay. The solar tenor is a container with a solar panel on roof, a battery and inverter installed and round cold inside. Africa Green Tech Mali is provides a solution because in areas of Mali, 20% have access to electricity. The Africa Green Tech provides the solution with 26 villages and 5,000 households electrified in Mali. The solar tenor is many advantage. Is mobile and he connect 450 customer, including small business and community infrastructure. And he take just 4 days for your installation and pack. Is robust because the solution is very adapted for the region and insecurity and of Africa. Is produce clean electricity. In Mali is Kayi region, Kulikoro region, and Segu region. Sikasso region. This is the opinion of customer in Mali, in village. He not use in diesel because Africa Green Tech provides clean energy. This is example on village electrician for Africa Green Tech. Africa Green Tech was in mobilize the partenaire because of the situation in Mali for public and private fund is very difficulty. The partnership has Grand Challenge Canada, CE Africa, DG German, Atmosphere, and ISF. To include Africa Green Tech have a government human by providing then small processes in it, shibater for the conservation and production in the house, and the equipment for help center. This is example of washing station to support community health. This is the example equipment of help center of better self-service. La freezer, efficient equipment. The project of empowerment human organizers of SOP. This is the perspective of Africa Green Tech in village impact sheet in Mali, model. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Alu.
Okay.
And it's wonderful to hear. Oh,
Please
sorry.
speak slowly and clearly because I speak a little bit English.
You've done such a wonderful job. Thank you, Alikita. We, of course, have my colleague Adiz here, who's here to support with translation for French to English, if you'd like to engage with Alu. But unfortunately, we've run out of time, as all things. But I just wanted to thank our panelists for a rich conversation, and I think what's really great to see here is such unique and different solutions to a very real challenge in the sector. And maybe if there's time at after the next panel, we can invite our panelists back to engage in a bit of Q&A with the audience. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And I think we'll invite the next round of panelists up to the stage. So Laura and all, feel free to go up. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions to raise, we'll have a first round of discussion, and then we'll have an open audience Q&A. So please be thinking of what you'd like to ask the panelists.
Hi, everyone, and a big thank you to our previous panel. I think some really interesting insights on the role of public-private partnerships. I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Laura Clough. I'm the Global Technical Advisor for Clean Cooking at SNV. For those that don't know, SNV is a global development partner working in around 23 countries on energy, agriculture, and water projects. To introduce the rest of my panel, and it's lucky I have a very handy slide here as well. So we have Dave Mazurski, the president and co-founder of Energy Peace Partners. We have, so there at the end, we have Eva Mack, the head of environmental sustainability at IOM. We have Mark Kara, who is the Humanitarian Innovation Portfolio Manager at the UNICEF Office of Innovation, and Lisa Satoli, who is the project lead for the Humanitarian and Resilience Investment Initiative. So thank you all for joining us on this panel today. I'm going to give you all just 1 to 2 minutes just to briefly introduce yourself and the role of your organization in humanitarian energy innovation. So let's start from the end with you, Dave, and maybe work our way back.
Thank you. My name is Dave Mazurski with an organization called Energy Peace Partners, and we work on the idea of renewable energy as a tool for peace. We have a financing mechanism we've developed called the Peace Renewable Energy Credit, or PREC, which connects corporate renewable energy investment with high impact projects in fragile states. And there have been a number of transactions that I'll tell you more about. And we also have a research track that looks at the intersection of renewable energy, of energy and conflict, and renewable energy and peace. And we co-lead an effort there called Powering Peace, which makes the case for leveraging peacekeeping, humanitarian, diesel generation as a way to transition to renewable and connect electricity to local communities.
Yes, and next. My name is Lisa Satori. I'm with the Humanitarian and Resilience. In short, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build more enabling or create more enabling market conditions in the most fragile context as a way to mobilize private sector investments, and through that hopefully help the scaling of market-driven solutions like the ones we've heard from in the previous panel. We work with an ecosystem. Well, we work across the ecosystem. So we work with over 100 partners, really, from sectors such as humanitarian agencies, donors, philanthropists, investors, and really recognizing that each of these stakeholder groups has a role to play in creating more enabling conditions in these markets. I'll speak a little bit to that later as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Eva Mach from IOM. Thank you so much for the organizers, first of all, for bringing us together. I could have listened to the previous panel for another hour, but as Zaina said, time is running. Largest humanitarian agencies, we do direct implementation around the world. But when it comes to energy access, since 2017, we have been asking the question, how can we actually enable the large-scale transformation of energy access? And we have been focusing on 3 key areas. One is data collection to make sure that projects, programs, policies are actually evidence-based, that we actually capture the needs of people and not just creating beautiful interventions that don't reflect the need of the communities. So through the displacement tracking matrix, which is the largest provider of data on internal displacement, we are now capturing the energy needs of people who were never in any of these energy mappings or data sets. So it's something that we think data is a key enabler, and this is something IOM is really trying to give to the whole sector. And I really liked what the professor said about where to get the information from. We do a lot of anecdotal programming in the humanitarian sector. So information and data is really critical when it comes to doing this at scale. The second thing is policy and advocacy, and this is something that we have been driving together with our GPA partners. As the largest entity that looks at migration in the UN system, it is a great responsibility to show the needs of people and making sure that whatever we gain as operational experience in the ground is actually fed back into policies. Not just external policy processes, international policy processes, but also internal ones, which I'm going to talk about later. And then maybe the third one where we have been focusing is really financing through partnerships. The previous panel already mentioned a lot of great things, but one of the key enablers in this system is the fact that we can bring people together. And I believe in the opening remarks, Norway mentioned the Innovation Norway project that provides seed funding. And I just want to say it's much more than seed funding. We also receive a lot of support when it comes to convening partners, convening markets and players. So these are the three key areas that we have been working, and I'm looking forward to a discussion.
Hi everyone, I'm Mattia Vianello, Head of Energy, Practical Action. Thanks Laura and thanks to GPA for organizing this. So Practical Action, we are a global organization, a development organization. We see ourselves as systems orchestrators in the sense that we work across different systems from energy, food security, agriculture, water. And we've been doing that for over 50 years across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We currently work in about 13 countries. And we've been very prominent organization in pushing the idea and new approaches in energy access in the last 15 years, 20 years mostly in the development space. And we have sort of been called upon really from the humanitarian space to try to provide some lessons and support in how to create markets in some of those areas, which where market players haven't really been supported enough or haven't really been successful to deliver energy. So that's, I think, what the type of lessons we'll bring. And yeah, it's very much, I mean, I guess we focus a lot around innovating, so finding new solutions, demonstrating them, and then bringing them to others to scale them up or do it ourselves if nobody's doing it. But we're not really an implementation organization, so it's really about creating the conditions for markets to emerge, and specifically in this case about humanitarian energy. And that's what I will be talking in a few minutes. Thanks.
Yeah, hi everyone. So thanks so much. Yes, my name is Mark Kaira. So I'm working on humanitarian innovations, and basically the vision of this is around. I mean, there are so many great solutions, but that does not necessarily mean that there is a demand for all the solutions. So really around how do you facilitate that discussion about bringing in solutions for supporting a business model that is more sustainable beyond initial funding that we might be receiving from donors, and then using that to then leverage, for example, blended finance models or looking at attracting additional investments. So coming from UNICEF, this also means that one example is around having a kind of a marketplace for innovations that some of our partners might be working with that have already been verifying those innovations at pilot stage and then bringing them in to the humanitarian context for scale. And one thing, as you know, we're in this conference where there is a lot of focus on humanitarian. That also means that there's focus on accountability for affected populations, humanitarian principles. But that does not necessarily mean that, for example, solutions coming from the private sector know how to link these humanitarian principles with their solutions. So we know how big the humanitarian market is. So then how do we, UNICEF is working with partners on being able to help facilitate a pathway for scaling some of these solutions through various country offices where our, for example, looking at green transitions or even, for example, in some countries where schools are highly dependent on sustainable energy. Health facilities are also relying on sustainable energy. So even that some of these health related programs are run by governments, but then how do we UNICEF then looks at bringing in some of these tools that we will be discussing as a support for sustainable run programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for the introductions. And David, I'd like to come to you. In terms of, we've seen innovative financing mechanisms can act as enablers for scaling energy access in humanitarian context. So can you tell us a bit more about the financing mechanism your organization has? You gave us a brief introduction, and perhaps you can also talk about some of the pending challenges you have in scaling it and what is needed to overcome them. And
thank you, Laura. And belatedly, thank you to the organizers for this, for organizing this excellent session. Thank you to Grand Challenges Canada, Creating Hope and Conflict. Okay, so as I mentioned, our financing innovation is called a Peace Renewable Energy Credit, or PREC. Essentially, we adapted an existing sustainability mechanism, a REC, Renewable Energy Certificate. In Europe, they're called Guarantees of Origin. That's a sister mechanism to a carbon credit. And on the voluntary market, it's primarily corporations that buy these. And it is a multi-billion-dollar market, primarily in North America and Europe, and expanding internationally. And so we extended that REC mechanism to be able to issue those from first-time electrification or high-impact renewable energy projects in fragile countries. So conflict-affected, climate-vulnerable, low energy access. And we partner with local projects, project developers, or humanitarian actors on the ground, on the one who validate the project, qualify the project, and then help facilitate that transaction. So in the humanitarian space, there have been PREC transactions in 6 countries so far, in South Sudan, DRC, Somalia, Chad, Nigeria, and Ethiopia, including with projects run by IOM in South Sudan, by Prado Power in Nigeria and Washima. We're working with Mercy Corps and UNICEF and others on this. And those over $1.3 million, and they've supported local public streetlights, hospital electrification, local agricultural productive use hubs. So that's the idea. It's essentially trying to draw this kind of specific mechanism for corporate sustainability. It desperately need financing. We're working on scaling this up with a new financing mechanism called the PREC Aggregation Facility, which hopefully will launch this summer. That's going to be an $11 million facility that prepays. So for projects that are not yet financed, it would be able to pre-purchase up to 10 years of PRECs in order to provide up to 10% of CapEx for those projects. And the hope is that that $11 million will unlock another $90 million in investment in about a dozen countries in sub-Saharan Africa. In terms of challenges, I think one that we see now, obviously the entire humanitarian sector is at a challenging moment today. I think it's an open question whether we're going to see climate is now a bad word in the US. I think it's a little bit too early to tell. We haven't seen signs of it yet, and we're hopeful. We see actually the PREC as being part of a solution to fill some of the funding gaps that are coming from donor reductions in funding. And so we're hopeful that we can lean into the PREC and our work to help fill that gap, but I think it's still a bit of an open question what the future holds in terms of.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for giving some more details there. Mattia, I'm going to come to you next. I'm going to jump around the panel a bit to keep you on your toes. So Practical Action has been promoting market-based approaches to energy access in displaced populations for some years now. So yeah, I'm curious to hear from you. What are some of the financing mechanisms you've been using? And what have you seen that's working well? And what further support is needed to scale some of those mechanisms?
Thanks. I mean, maybe just to start, I mean, we don't promote market-based approaches just because we think we need to create markets, but because from the experience we have in development settings, especially in rural Africa, we saw that often, almost always, private sector will be the best suited to deliver this type of energy services. They offer the options, the solutions, and often even the prices, if correctly supported, to the customers. So the objective is to get people access to those energy services. The objective should not be just creating markets, I think. But in that case, we started this journey about 10 years ago in working in Burkina Faso, also in Kenya, now in Rwanda for the last 7 years, across 2 phases of programs with different funders from FCDO, the Nekia Foundation, now SIDA, the Swedish in Rwanda. And our experience has been that, very much, finance obviously is a key component of that. Right? When we develop markets, just to be clear, we try to create the conditions for suppliers of off-grid solar products, clean cooking devices, and also productive use of energy appliances for people to generate incomes into those camps and the surrounding communities. We saw that often companies don't have the willingness to get there because they perceive a risk. And those companies are often very small companies because in our experience, we also learned that against what might be more intuitive thinking are not the large, more established companies the best suited to deliver those products, the ones that you think might take the risks, are actually the ones that actually are willing to develop a business model just around that. The type of finance those companies need, so we're talking about finance at the sort of supplier level now, is very much about de-risking their initial investment. So coming in, having some support to set up a shop, to also fill up their stock, to start selling, and also really experiment with business models, what can work there. So that's very much fundamental. We experimented that with some grants that we gave to some of the companies through some procurement processes where they had to propose their innovation and business models. And then we can see now how that can scale up. But the risk in finance is fundamental for those companies, and that can be done in different ways. And we can go further into that. Also, in-kind support in terms of technical assistance, also in the financial aspects, can be really important. I think a key learning there, technical assistance should be coming from the needs of those companies, should not be an NGO organization say you need this type of TA. It really needs to be demand-driven. The other part of the finance sort of bubble that we need to discuss, I think, is the consumer's finance. Because even when those companies are there, what we saw, we came into this sector 10 years ago, everything was hands out, there was nothing. Then we say, there is a market, let's bring the private companies. And the private companies came in, and we realized that, although a large majority of refugees could pay for a lot of those products, a big proportion could not, or could not afford them in the longer term because of many reasons, but affordability really is that. So what type of finance do they need? And what type of financial tools as well to use this finance is very much intrinsic to the business model those companies design. But also we found out and we experimented, if you want, some approaches which very much were learned from the development space, from successful cases from the rural access of energy in Africa, especially, for example, result-based finance that comes initially from the health sector, so supporting companies to basically sell their products with some initial investment from the side of a funder, and then they manage to bring a bit down the price of those products, clean cooking, for example, devices or solar home systems, or even solar fridges, and access them. So people have a lower price. And when we do this, we don't do for all the refugees, but only for those ones who are in the lowest segment. And helps a lot, of course, working with the humanitarian organization in this case, because they have those databases, they're able to identify which ones can access those or cannot. But the other point is just about the business models. That's the other key part. And that, I think, should really come from the companies. And they are coming up also with some of their models. And again, some of the learning we had that some of them, as I say, some of the companies more established with, for example, business model as pay-as-you-go, which is let's say, has been the most successful in the last decade in sub-Saharan Africa for solar home systems, haven't managed really to reach the majority of those refugees with this product, mostly because of the challenges for people to even access just basic credit, to then pay this in a continuous way. And some of the most successful were actually companies, local companies, in the case of Rwanda, from Rwanda, who actually use some very Rwanda style, like community type of grant, like a revolving fund, linked up to the refugee communities to come up with their innovations together with the companies, and of course, finding the ways where to support that. So just to close here on this, so supply and consumer, looking at the two, I mean, obviously there are no
silver bullets. There are different conditions, and maybe just one point I wanted to make, having worked in different contexts, it's really important to understand where we are on this sort of market spectrum. What's the real ability of people to pay off without being very, ideological about imposing a full market base. Even outside camps, you need subsidies very often. Even in Europe, where our energy is mostly subsidized, so we need to recognize that.
Thank you, Mattia. And yeah, I think some really interesting points there and on not kind of prescribing solutions, which I think we heard earlier as well, and that need for kind of holistic support and for it to be demand driven as well. Eva, I'll come to you next. And a humanitarian organization working in many complex settings. From your experience, what do you see as the type of kind of finance, the partnerships and the policies that are needed to support scaling of energy access in humanitarian contexts?
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a comprehensive overview of the whole market-based approach, which is never a pure market-based approach. So I will focus on the policy side, and I wanted to actually focus on our internal policy side, because for us to be able to enable the great work that you guys are doing, all the innovators are doing, we need to look inside as well. So I have to say that while most of our humanitarian colleagues are the first ones to go into conflict settings, disaster-affected areas to help people, the sector itself is very risk-averse. And when we talk about private partnerships, public-private partnerships, that risk-aversiveness is really a barrier. And any kind of innovation, if it's innovation or its scale, requires really risk-taking. And we are talking about innovative finance here. I mean, these are financial mechanisms, especially if we are talking about scaling, that require new financial policies. They require new risk management policies. So one of the key issues that we need to think about and in the policy space is how to design stronger risk management policies that will allow us to actually drive the identity. What is the risk of that partnership compared to the benefits that it brings to communities? How can we share the risk with partners? I mean, I think we are not too... least to say, we are not really good at understanding and structuring deals. This is not our mandate. This is not the nature of our organization, but it's really key to understand how we can share risks, not just resource. Point around that is really costing and pricing that risk. So when a contract takes a year or years to negotiate, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what is the price of that risk management? And I think that's something that needs to be conceptualized, and it needs to be measured by the impact that these partnerships can actually bring to the communities. And we often lose sight of that. We just focus on the words and we focus on the contract, we focus about reputational risks, but we need to, again, shape our policies so they go into a different direction and continue with the mandate of the humanitarian principles, and Mark also mentioned the accountability to affected populations, which is also about bringing resources. So again, risk policies, I think, is something we will need to take a look at. Maybe the second policy I wanted to highlight is general resource management policies, because in many cases we have amazing ideas. People who work with the communities, we are a direct implementer as IOM, they have great ideas. Our operational colleagues, they know what is needed to be done. But once they start looking into how to find a solution, how to build the ecosystem, how to make it happen, that operationalization becomes a very bureaucratic process. And it goes back to my first point, which is about we try to always reduce risk. We always try to reduce risk to our donors, to ourselves, and to the whole sector. So we have to be able to redefine what these management policies should be driving. And I think this is where, again, we need the advocacy and the support of our member states and our donors, or green interventions in general. And then the last point that I wanted to make is on evaluation, which is not necessarily a policy, but the way we evaluate projects. I think, especially innovation, every single innovation should be evaluated based on the impact that we bring to the people. And sometimes when we talk about that, we become lost in the right indicators. We have tens of indicators, but really there should be one or two indicators that show the impact of changing someone's life. And in the case of energy access, that's really powerful. And we have collaborated with Energy Peace partners, we have collaborated with Practical Action. But the real impact that we see is someone having access to a light bulb. And that's something we cannot put in an indicator. So this is where case studies are super powerful to show how people's lives are changing. And we should not forget about this in our reporting. So evaluation and reporting, again, is something we should be thinking about, especially when we scale, because that's how we're going to create.
Thank you. And thanks, Eva. I think you've highlighted that, yeah, the complexities and the kind of reality and challenges of trying to implement some of these more innovative approaches. And I think, Mark, we can come to you and hear a bit more about the work that you're doing in trying to promote innovations in humanitarian settings and some of the challenges we face in scaling new innovations, and what are some of the approaches we can take to overcome these?
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much. Innovation in humanitarian context. So as you know, I mean, we have a problem. Like, what is that problem? Well, a huge problem that many of us are discussing relates to operation and maintenance. It's easy enough for many to procure solar and install solar facilities, but we also know that one of the best things about solar is that it's a lot of potential energy that can be captured for many years. So even the most basic solar facility could also break down if after a few years we don't have the proper maintenance to do that. And so one of the barriers for that maintenance also relates to some of the funding that's required to ensure that that we can at least pay a technician to repair. Or in some cases, even a screw that might be missing, that would also jeopardize the entire facility. So based on some of these barriers, how do we then identify and bring in different tools and resources to help solve this problem? So what is, as an example of something of how we've been able to approach this is that, as I mentioned, for UNICEF, we don't necessarily do and build innovations, but rather we look at the broader market, who are focusing on some of these challenges but have not yet linked it to the humanitarian space. So in this case, we've had lots of discussions with Grand Challenges Canada, who have provided initial investments, for example, to Energy Peace partners and to other partners on being able to help develop pilots for looking at solutions for these kinds of problems. And in this case, we know in fragile contexts and conflict affected context, it's one of the contexts with the least amount of investments if we look at it globally on renewable energies. And so having those discussions with Grand Challenges Canada, they've done the reviews, they've done the evidence. So this was one approach for us to then be able to source a solution through that evidence to UNICEF. And one of the things that we like to do is look at, okay, how can we bring in solution for accelerating it to scale through a pipeline that relates to our country offices. So then we looked at opportunities, and in this case, even with Innovation Norway, where we said, okay, we've identified a problem. This problem is something we see with country offices, also a problem with governments who are interested in their green transition, and realize that this problem really relates to different things, including localization of capacity. I mentioned about installing screws, innovative finance in terms of how do we attract investments for operation and maintenance, and then also even planning. where can we even put solar facilities to make optimal use of capturing energy to power the facility, but then also to generate revenue through renewable energy credits. So taking this more of a portfolio-based approach of being able to link different partners and resources and innovation to then help narrow that down as a way for solving this challenge. And so this is an example of how I thought it was interesting with the last discussion where there was some points being raised in relation to the private sector, but where we see one of the huge barriers is that if things are only purely donor based, that donor funding will eventually run out if it does not have a sustainable business model behind it. And in this case, this is something we've acknowledged where we were able to bring in this opportunity of leveraging credits as a way for de-risking, because then we're attracting multiple funding resources to help us solve this problem. Where then we're looking at options in DRC Congo, Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, Yemen, and then bringing these discussions to governments, where then governments are looking at options for even letter of no objections, because they also acknowledge that as UNICEF or other entities, having risk mitigation or accountability frameworks is also a way for being able to de-risk funding that can help support with these efforts.
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, I think highlighting that kind of role of partnerships in bringing in new innovations and scaling innovations is really important as well. And Lisa, lastly, to come to you and maybe thinking about some of the work that you've been doing engaging investors, it would be great to hear your perspectives on, what are investors looking for when it comes to scaling business models, and how can investors and other organizations support that scaling as well?
Yes, thank you, Laura. Exciting is we are talking about places, fragile humanitarian contexts where traditionally there's not been a massive role for investors. Within the HR initiative, we're now working with a network of over 65 capital providers that are all actively looking to engage and provide capital amongst different financing stages in these contexts. I think that's already a really exciting evolution, but only because we're now speaking of humanitarian context, we shouldn't forget they're not humanitarian actors, right? And I think that's something that's sometimes overlooked. We are still talking about investors, and they are still at their core looking at and so they are still looking at risk and returns. They're looking at, do they have an investment mechanism and model in place and the mandate to be able to enter these markets, and also what are their exit opportunities and the let's say the time frame of that exit. This means that in the same way that businesses operating in these most difficult contexts have had to adapt their business models, we need a similar adaptation from investors that are looking to operate in these models. And this is something we briefly touched upon during the last panel. What are some of the operational challenges? There's also operational challenges from investors. So we are seeing kind of new and innovative investment models that are popping up and that are being tried and tested, and some of them are proving to be successful, but they're by far not enough just yet. And this is a little bit where kind of HRE comes in recognizing that it's not just the work of the investors, but actually in order to be able to create more enabling market conditions that investors can actually come in, but also for entrepreneurs, quite frankly, to grow and scale. We need an entire ecosystem of partners to come together and work together. So we need increased coordination between impact capital providers. There's a massive opportunity, for example, for capital providers to kind of pass on investment opportunities from one financing stage to the next, or to co-invest in riskier investment opportunities. Also with the activities of development organizations and humanitarian partners, so that they're informed by really local needs and risk assessments. We need, of course, a meaningful engagement with humanitarian actors and again, also local actors after the investment is made, to make sure that there is community engagement and dialogue and to further de-risk the investment after it's made. And then we need a stronger overall alignment between grant-based activities, making sure that they really align and support those investment and entrepreneurial activities. That's a type of collaboration that's currently not happening yet. There's a lot of these kind of individual efforts happening in silos, and great that that's the case. But as long as they don't align, we're not able to have that one intervention unlock the potential for another actor to come in and address the risks or the barriers and the challenges of that other actor. So again, this is where HRI really comes in and tries to facilitate this type of collaboration across the different stakeholder groups. But we also recognize that for different stakeholder groups are, in many cases, different from the roles and functions they've traditionally played. So there's a lot of organizational readiness that comes into play there as well. We just heard from Mattia on for example, the consumer finance, and earlier from Jacob about cash transfers and please donors. Don't design your projects in the way you've done it in the past decade. It's those kind of shifts of recognizing that humanitarian actors play a massive role in market demand, or donors can play a massive role in providing catalytic finance that requires a little bit of systems change, and then once they have made that shift and play that new role, we need to be able to connect the dots and then the second way in which I think partnerships are extremely important in these markets is not all investments or not all private activity is good, right? Or creates a positive impact. The interventions must be intentional, and for them to be intentional, they must be informed by local knowledge and again work together with local stakeholders. So that's another really important point, to make sure that it's not just more capital and more activity. We don't have the unintentional negative consequence or externalities that we have seen in the past. So those activities must be well informed. I will pause there, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I think just to highlight a word we hear more and more often requires shifts in kind of thinking, policies and systems that we've heard. We're going to go, and I think we can take a few questions from the audience. I think we have a few minutes left. So do we have any questions? Yeah. We can take two or three and then put them back to the panel, I think. You can just briefly say your name and organization and your question.
Hi, I'm Sasha. I'm from Surgibox, so the private sector. I have two questions in one. So we are a small team, and if it takes 1.5 years to sign a contract, we're dead as a small company. How do you then this will privilege only you working with the big companies and not SMEs? How can you facilitate the scaling up, and how much time do you give to a business to prove the model? Uber has not been profitable for 14 years, but donors give us 1 to 1.5 years to prove the concept.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hello, hi, Max from Response Innovation Lab. I guess the question is regarding the structure of the funding, which from the humanitarian side often comes in the shape of grants. And it seems that there's a limitation to what grants can achieve when it comes to, as it was mentioned, in terms of sustainability. And I guess the question I'm asking is, I've seen some examples of grant funding being used specifically to reduce the unit costs of certain innovations as a way to make them more, accessible to the market, more sustainable. Is that something that the panel has sort of come across? Is that a better way to invest? Are there examples of that, or does that not work at scale? But I'm just curious to know if there's been experiences with that. Thank you.
Okay, I think we had one more hand. We'll take that as the last question.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Louise Leach. I'm the head of the UNOPS Liaison Office here in Geneva. It's been a really fascinating conversation, and so I think one of the colleagues said earlier I could sit and listen to this for hours and hours. My question, I guess, is, well, one of the questions is, how are we at country level ensuring that we've got alignment around the priorities that are being set by the government to all of the very many people and actors in this space? Clearly now it's an opportunity for huge impact in terms of solarization of facilities and ensuring, particularly in crisis settings, that we're actually addressing these issues in a really rapid way. But I guess the question is, how? And the UN country team doesn't seem to be it. So I guess the question is, on everybody's lips this week, how are we reconstructing some of these systems that have been put in place when we've got great examples, like UNICEF, like ours, but also like the Global Fund and Gavi and all of the NGOs and INGOs that we're seeing here? How can we do this better? My fear is that we're still all over the place when it comes to clean energy access, particularly in crisis settings. Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe we'll go to, I think it was Sasha. Was it Sasha's question first around the length of time the private sector can have to kind of prove themselves and the length of time it can take to engage them? Would anyone like to talk to that one?
Aimed to anyone in particular?
I can take this question because we are facing the same question, and our team is actually looking at longer term solutions. Environmental sustainability, by definition, is about thinking about the future, thinking about a healthy environment, which is in these settings where we operate is never going to be the priority. So we have been facing the same conversations when it comes to the length of the projects and the humanitarian funding cycles. And I think it goes back a little bit to Louise's question as well, that the fact that we are bound by these very short funding cycles, we have to be very creative. And you as a company, on the other hand, you are most probably so interested in doing good that you are ready to wait for us. Honestly, sometimes I hope I cannot be quoted, but sometimes I say, if I was that company on the other side, I wouldn't be waiting for us or a partner to sign this agreement, because the cost of inaction is very high for you. You mentioned you can even go into bankruptcy if you are waiting for the funding to arrive. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, sadly, as the funding situation is changing. I don't have an answer. The only thing I can tell you is that you need internal champions. That's the only way to make partnerships work. I think Jacob mentioned we shouldn't pick, winners. I do think you need a partner inside entities, donors, humanitarian partners, country teams, governments that can help to make sure that even within a year and a half that actually happens. Because without the support, without the advocacy, it's really, really hard just to do market-based approaches in these difficult settings. I just
one quick point so we can get to some of the other questions.
To Max's question, which I think it's so if you think about the concept of carbon credits, that's exactly the concept of carbon credit, right? You are trying to reduce, you try to subsidize an emission reducing energy intervention. So that's something that we have been working with. We directly implemented PREX, climate finance, carbon finance, but all these challenges, we need to work together. So I really liked when Laura mentioned collaboration. There is no silver bullet. It's not going to be just one kind. Committed people come together that we can do a project in 1.5 years that normally takes 5. So
thank you, Eva. Mark, I think you wanted to add something to that.
Do we just want to answer specific questions or all?
You can
Okay.
answer any of them.
So, hi
Yeah.
everyone. So, sorry. So one thing that caught my attention, attracted to my provocation a little bit, was around the question on yes, there are delays regarding internal workflows is something that we really have to be better at. But from a partner perspective, I mean there are some ways of approaching this. One, for example, is around long-term agreements, where let's say that you have this agreement in place, then you've done all of the due diligence in relation to protection of sexual exploitation, abuse, budgeting, and other kinds of requirements that relate to UN partnerships. But those long-term agreements can also be updated as needed. And this is something that we've also seen, for example, in Kenya, who are working with the private sector to customize humanitarian assistance kits to ensure that they fit for emergency response. And so having those agreements with the private sector were then updated to ensure that the items that are being procured, that humanitarian response. And one other way that we've been thinking, and this is based on discussions with other partners, is around should some of the donors also use some catalytic funding directly to partners instead of it being routed through UN organizations. And this also relates to the localization agenda, reflection of the grand bargain as well. And so, yeah, also really acknowledge that, without having partners in place, that there is the gap of implementation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, it's an interesting point, I think, and maybe Matthew, we see as development partners where we can also kind of engage with the private sector, support the private sector in those roles as well. Do we still have a few minutes, Amy?
Yeah.
Okay. I think Lisa, Matthew wants to. Lisa, do you want to go ahead? Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll keep it very brief, Max. I believe you're asking about kind of financing innovation and does that really help? We're working with the partner Leia Foundation. They're saying nobody finances this, this gap, so we're going to sit there, which is amazing. But the moment that they kind of exit their portfolio, someone needs to pick them up, right? And this is really where what I mentioned, what I mentioned earlier is we need to see connection between the different financing stages and the capital providers sitting at different financing stages. And a lot of people say there's no pipeline, and I'm like, maybe there are pipeline challenges, but if a reputable peer says this is an organization on their board, we've given them technical sessions and investor guidance, I vouch for them. They're good guys, invest in them, then it is worth it at the very least to have a look at them. So it's really that type of collaboration that it's one of the things that we're trying to help facilitate. And the second one is at country level. We had a meeting, a convening in northern Kenya. Well, not in northern Kenya, but about northern Kenya, but in Nairobi last year. And the initial kind of response that we got from the ecosystem was, why? We don't need you. We already know each other. We know everybody that's here. And then we realized that each other's initiatives and they were not speaking with each other, and they're not aligning efforts and initiative as much as they could have. And definitely not then in collaboration and conversation with the government and in alignment with government priorities. So this is another work stream that we're now kicking off, is really working at market level and mapping that ecosystem, mapping initiatives, mapping pipeline, and starting to connect the dots amongst that, because it's currently indeed not happening. I'll keep it there. Thank you.
Matthew, do you want to respond to any of the questions?
Yeah. I mean, I realize there is one unanswered question, but I still wanted to go back to Max. And maybe I use this just as an opportunity for a message, like if there is a funder donor who's keen to sort of put money to make those markets work. I think it's really important to consider that there are no silver bullets. Context is really fundamental. Any situation we are talking about, I don't know, we work in Rwanda, the refugee camps is very different from Kenya, very different from Uganda. That's fundamental. And I think something that sometimes funders, from my experience, get lost in is where we are, or a company. In the innovation part, are we innovating? Are we sort of demonstrating? Are we scaling? And be clear on where you are putting your money at that point. Because if you are innovating, you are taking risks, and you need to accept those risks. You need to accept that the direct impact might not be very high. If you're at the scaling point, you need to be clear on what you are trying to scale, why that is achieving higher, and then you might expect higher impact. I think there are plenty of examples from the energy access space, even outside humanitarian sort of space, where money from funders, bilaterals, or private foundations have been used to stimulate those markets, either through consumer finance, supplier finance, reducing the price of products as well. I think there are a number of examples. Happy to tell you a bit after this. But yeah, context is fundamental, really.
Thank you, Mattia. Dave, any final reflections from you before we close?
Sure. Maybe picking up a little bit on Louise's question about what are the systems to work with government, and your observation that clean energy access seems all over the place. I think that's very true. I think part of what you hear in the conversation today is a reflection that of a bunch of organizations and agencies that are not by mandate or makeup energy experts, trying to figure out how to do it on the fly is uncharitable, because there's a lot of work that's gone into this, but it's not being led as an energy first intervention in almost any case. There's a couple of renewable energy companies here whose day job is to do this, but that's the exception. And so I guess my message to donors and maybe the wider conversation is that I think we can flip that on its head. I think part of what goes unrecognized in this in the way that this has evolved is that energy often plays a pretty meaningful role in the conflict dynamics, in perpetuating conflict dynamics in many places, many humanitarian settings or areas that have humanitarian settings, that there are opportunities to lean into clean energy as tools for peace and development and economic activity, rather than just an output of a WASH program or a health program. And so leaning into renewable energy or energy access as a goal of a country program in fragile state is something that really there are very few examples of from a donor level or country level. And I think that there's room for growth and opportunity there.
Thank you. And I'd just like to thank all our panelists again today, and also to you. Thank you as the audience for your attentive listening and questions. Amy, do I hand it back to you, or is that it? We're done.
Yeah, just a big round of applause, I think, for our panel and all the panelists in the discussions. I think, Therese, I'll come over for a very quick final reflection. We've been working a bit with Innovation Norway on looking at fails and how to not repeat those failures. It's something that, and how do we learn together as a sector? And so it's something that we're inquiring with many stakeholders, and something that I think we would love for all of you to join that conversation. If you have any final reflections from the Innovation Norway side, especially as you've funded a lot of these energy projects and what you've learned, and where we are.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. There are a lot of really, I think, groundbreaking initiatives that you're testing out, and sharing that learning with the broader community is really important. As Amy said, we're working on a report trying to focus on the failures and seeing what we can do to not repeat those, but to build on what you guys are doing that is working really well. So I will share that with all of you once the report is available. Some of you will be invited for interviews to share your experiences and practical know-how. So we hope you'll accept that invitation to share. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Should we get a picture of the panel?
Yeah.
It's like a panel picture.
Where? I mean, what you said.
They've really I love that. I love it. And I mean, yeah, I'm doing good, but yeah, they're kind of like
They just want to make the markets, you know, we do really nothing, but our rates have been more the sort of, you know, there's some of the private sector. This is convenient and mapping, now it's here inside. I think we need to fight at least to talk a bit.
we are taking a really important conversation. But I think it's all about it.
But there's, I think, a way that we can find that. Because it's been a weak spot, right? Especially now, like larger national companies, like we've got like startups, like